Welcome to the Feeling Better podcast. My name is Maria, and I'm the host of this podcast, former gambling addict and devoted Christian homesteading wife. I'm also the author of the Feeling Better 10-4 program that teaches you a practical, effective, inspirational 10-week program to help you overcome your compulsive gambling addiction, which you can listen to in the first 15 episodes of my podcast. Thanks so much for being here. For the record, if you're wondering, I'm still hanging in there with the no smoking thing. By the time this episode launches on the 18th, it will be 20 days, just shy of 3 weeks. Just like giving up any other addiction, like gambling, alcohol, sugar, or anything else, not smoking does get easier the longer you go. Thank God I'm past the worst of it. You know, I had a plan in mind for this episode, and just as I sat down to hash it out, I decided to change it. More on that in a second because I want to have a chat with you all about something super crazy that happened to me last week. Can I tell you all a secret? Sometimes things just mess with our head in unexpected ways that totally catch us off guard. First of all, in case you've been hiding under a rock this year, sourdough bread making is the new kombucha fad, which replaced the old essential oils fad. You know how every few years there's a big fad or trend that crunchy granola homesteaders and homemakers really get into? I never did the whole kombucha thing, but I did do the essential oils. I'm not sure why I'm a sucker for these things. Maybe it's just because I enjoy the hobby, or maybe because I'm looking for something to give me an extra boost. Something that just, increases my energy levels or improves my mood. Essential oils were fun until the FDA started cracking down on us when we said things like lavender oil is good for burns. Nope, you can't say that. Not if you're making money off of selling oils. Only the government is allowed to make money off of human gullibility. Anyway, this year, the trend for homemakers is sourdough bread making. Hang with me here. I know this sounds like a weird rabbit trail, but I promise I'm going somewhere with this. Now, two things had me hopping on the sourdough bread bandwagon. One is that bread is getting expensive, and two is that sourdough bread is supposed to be good for you. We don't eat that much bread. I love sourdough though, and so about once every 2 or 3 weeks, I'll buy a loaf of sourdough bread from our grocery store's bakery and keep it in the fridge. Sometimes I even put half the loaf in the freezer and just keep a few pieces in the fridge for that occasional time when one of us wants a sandwich or a couple of pieces of toast. It's not that often, so it's not like it's that big of a financial drain. But still, I wanted to try my hand at making my own bread. First, I started with yeast sandwich bread, but that gave me massive heartburn and I started feeling twinges of diverticulitis flare-ups. I know I'm sensitive to gluten in breads, and that's one of the reasons why I gravitate to sourdough. If I eat too much wheat, like too many cookies or too much white bread or buns or a big ol' meal of biscuits and gravy, it tends to bug me. My eczema flares up and I get heartburn and I get a little bit of a wonky stomach ache. I know that sourdough's fermentation process makes the wheat and gluten more digestible, which is better for people like me who have stomach issues. So I went into my pantry and dug into the catacombs to pull out some dehydrated sourdough starter that I'd bought a few years ago. I started watching videos and reading articles about how to rehydrate my starter and make bread. Lord have mercy, I had no idea how much work was going to be involved. I don't have the time to get into all the details here, but let's just say it's kind of like having a kid. You have to feed your sourdough bread starter regularly and change its diaper. Just kidding about that last part. But you do have to scoop out some of your starter and then feed it whenever you want to use it. You have to scoop out and discard some of it because when you feed it more flour, it bulks up and expands. So if you don't scoop out some, you're going to have a bubbly, overflowing monster on your hands. But feeding and maintaining the starter was actually the easy part. The hard part was making the bread. Now, I'm the kind of gal that likes to use recipes as guidelines. I'll take a glance or two at the general idea of the recipe or the list of ingredients or what needs to happen, but then I just eyeball everything. I don't like measuring. That's not the way my Arabic aunts and grandmother did it, and they were the best cooks that I'd ever known. Growing up, I never saw them pull out a measuring cup or measuring spoons. In fact, I don't believe they ever even owned anything measuring. That's just how I learned to cook. You measure with your eyes. But friends, I found out pretty quickly that you can't bake bread measuring with your eyes, especially sourdough. So when I saw all the videos of these women measuring using scales and grams, saying things like, use 100 grams of starter or 400 grams of flour, I was like, yeah, no, I am not going through all of that. I am going to figure this out all on my own until I get it right. I'm serious. That is what I intended. Because in my mind, women have been baking sourdough bread for centuries. And I'm pretty sure the ladies of the ancient Roman times didn't order all those fancy electronic scales and sourdough bread making gadgets and all the supplies from Amazon back then. If they could do without all that fancy stuff, then so could I. So the day after I quit smoking, I activated my sourdough starter just to give me something to take my mind off of it. And I spent the next several days feeding it and discarding it and feeding it and discarding it. And I had tons of flour stored up in my pantry to play around with, so I figured I had nothing to lose. For the following 3 weeks, I would proceed to feed my starter and remove the discard, which is just the weird term for the excess starter that you pull out of it, and then bake stuff with it. When you feed the sourdough starter, it ferments, and it takes the place of yeast to make bread puffy and fluffy. But with the excess starter that you pull out, you can also use it to make things like crackers and pancakes and muffins. That stuff was easy. I rocked the sourdough pancakes and muffins. They were delish. But the bread took a little longer to figure out, especially without weighing and measuring. It was literally trial and error, without a whole lot of consistency, as you can imagine. And I made some really bad loaves, and some halfway decent loaves, and a couple of, hey, you're actually getting there kind of loaves. I was bound and determined to get the whole process of eyeballing so I could be a master bread maker using nothing but my eyes and a whole lot of heart. I knew with another week or two of practice that I'd have it down pat. But then last weekend happened. I had the mother of all downer weekends. It all started because my sleep had become utter crap. I found myself consistently, and I'm talking like every night, waking up at 3 a.m, and then 4 a.m, and then 5 a.m, like clockwork. Every single night, on the hour. I'd fall asleep and then wake up, and then fall asleep and then wake up. I mean, I couldn't figure it out. Was it hormones? A spiritual attack? I saw some video about how waking up like that is some kind of spiritual thing, like God is waking you up to pray and be his middle of the night warrior. I didn't quite believe that, but I had no other explanation. I messed around trying different blankets, thinking I was too hot or too cold. I'd crack a window and put on some white noise and listen to scripture as I fell asleep and used aromatherapy. I even took a Benadryl and an Advil PM, and nothing worked. I kept waking up several times a night, which was absolutely frustrating. I am not the greatest sleeper anyway these days, but this was something entirely new for me. Then, on Friday of last weekend, my husband had this client who was a devout Christian, and she wanted to pray over us. I was heading out to meet a friend for lunch and thought that was a pretty awesome thing to fortify me because this friend was going through a rough patch and I wanted to be a spirit of encouragement and strength for her. So this woman client FaceTimed us and she began praying and praying and praying. I thought my hubby said long prayers. He's got nothing on this girl. Bless her heart, her words were powerful. My hubby sat quietly with his head bowed, as did I, as we held hands and humbly listened to her pray over us. But 20 minutes later, I started getting antsy, looking at my watch. Praying for somebody is one thing, but the power of prayer, folks, really starts to go south when someone goes on and on and on and on. And if you're a Christian, I'm sure you know what I mean and have witnessed what I'm talking about. That's why Jesus told us not to pray long prayers, because our Father in heaven knows what we need. He taught his followers to pray the Lord's Prayer, which is the Our Father who art in heaven prayer. When you drone on and on in your prayers, you take away the power of God and you put it on yourself, which is a topic for another discussion. But to make a long story short, just when I felt like this gal was winding things down, she started all over again speaking in tongues. Now, I'm not going to get into that here either, because I'm not saying one way or another whether this is a real thing, but I'll be honest. Hearing people speaking in tongues makes me feel weird. I mean, I always interpreted tongues as speaking in other languages, which is what the scriptures tell us, not gibberish. It's a controversial thing that I'm not going to pretend to understand, but what I did understand, though, is that if I didn't get up and leave, I was going to be late for my lunch date. So I finally just told the gal that I had to run, and I bailed out of there. The rest of that weekend, though, I was so crabby. I was tired. I was irritable. I was crustier than the most perfectly baked sourdough bread. I say that all cute and funny, but the reality was, it was starting to scare me. I was having angry thoughts, depressed thoughts, really dark thoughts, blasphemous thoughts about God, and prickly, snarly thoughts about my husband, and old feelings of discontentment and exhaustion, weary with life and just wanting nothing more to do with any of it. We went to church on Sunday as usual, and typically I wake up all sing-songy and worshipy and happy in the morning before church. But that Sunday I was grumpy and frustrated. I didn't understand where it was coming from. Did that woman who prayed over us actually do something sinister and maybe demonic? It didn't make sense. I mean, she did invoke the name of Jesus many times during her praying, and even though it was unconventional, I didn't really get the sense that it was something evil or sinister. But it was the only thing I could think of that was out of the ordinary. Yet, I didn't like to think that after all I had been through, the prayer of one woman could change things in my demeanor. Faith is not meant to be something mysterious or delicate or precarious. One person's words can't change or curse or bless you that easily. This niggled in my brain, and I swear I could hear the devil trying to convince me that it could, that this woman did something nefarious. But deeper in my spirit, I knew that wasn't the cause of my distress. Then I thought about cigarettes and my new non-smoking status. Was I feeling some serious withdrawal? I mean, yes, I wanted a cigarette. Every day I have ridiculously strong cravings, but they are fading. It made no sense that I'd be feeling that intense irritability and creeping depression that long after quitting. All I wanted to do was go to bed and go to sleep, but I knew that I just couldn't sleep well even if I wanted to. I could not for the life of me put the pieces of the puzzle together. I felt itchy, anxious, glum, tired, irritable, and frustrated. I couldn't focus on anything, and my husband even commented on how scatterbrained and forgetful I had been, which was totally not like me at all. I have the blessing of a terrific memory and an eye for detail, so I attributed my scatterbrainedness to lack of sleep. But why wasn't I sleeping? It was all a conundrum that I just couldn't figure out. Church that Sunday was great, as always. Our pastor started a new series, and I loved the hugs I got from everyone. It's honestly the best part of my week. As we were all standing around fellowshipping with each other afterward, my hubby drew me in close and asked, "Are you doing better?" I nodded, smiling. When we got home, he took a phone call, and I heated up some leftover pancakes and made a quiche using some of the sourdough discard for a crust. And then I sighed, looking around at the dishes I had to do and the dinner I forgot to put in the crock pot. I have really been trying so hard these last few months to give myself Sundays as a Sabbath day of rest, because Lord knows I need it. I stood there. My back hurt, my joints ached, my head throbbed, all because of lack of sleep. And I knew I couldn't rest while dinner needed to be made and there was a mess in the kitchen. And I'm being totally transparent here because maybe this will help somebody in my shoes. I legit just left it all and told my husband I was going to lie down and take a nap. I wasn't even sure if I could sleep, but I just needed to lie down and hide away for a while. And while I lay there, I squeezed my eyes shut and started feeling weepy. My irritability was through the roof. I just felt so exhausted and weary. My heart was sad and my mind couldn't relax. I asked God, can you please just take me? Can you just come get me? I don't even care how. A heart attack, a stroke, even cancer. Just don't make it hard on my husband. But I'm tired and I'm so ready to go. And then I started to full on cry because I knew he wouldn't take me. Not now. But yet I wanted to go so bad. Who was this? And what on earth was wrong with me? What happened to all the joy and happiness and hope? I hurriedly wiped my tears away in case my hubby came into the room because I didn't want him to see. I already felt so bad at being crabby with him all weekend. I hadn't felt these kinds of dark, depressing thoughts in a very long time, since last year when I dealt with the aftermath of gambling. I had been doing great. The last few months have been awesome for me. I mean, even though we don't have money, I had a strong relationship with God that fueled my purpose and joy in life. So why had I suddenly fallen into darkness? Was this another kind of spiritual attack? What in the world was causing me to have thoughts of wanting to die, even if they were only fleeting and half serious? Miserably, I popped in my earbuds and began mindlessly scrolling through Instagram reels. I knew I should have been listening to sermons. That's what I wanted to do. It's what I do joyfully and eagerly every Sunday. But that afternoon, I was over the whole faith thing. I mean, why did it have to be so darn hard? And what was wrong with me? And then God threw me a lifeline, a really big one. My thumb hovered over a video of an average, unmemorable, nondescript woman who didn't appear at first as if she was going to say anything interesting. But just as I was about to swipe her away to the next video, she said, "Do you find yourself waking up regularly at 2 a.m., at 3 a.m., 4 a.m.? My eyes widened. Yeah, that was me. Was this going to be some kind of demonic thing? Because I was sick and tired of seeing videos about how demons interrupt our sleep. That seemed unfair given all I'd been through. I mean, it's tough enough to fight them while you're awake, but while you're sleeping? It just didn't seem right. But no, she went on. The reason that's happening is because your blood sugar is low. What? Blood sugar? That was not what I was expecting at all. She went on to explain that people who are insulin resistant or eating a high-carb diet could get to the point where their blood sugar keeps spiking and crashing, even to the point where it was crashing during the night while you were sleeping, causing the body to wake in biological desperation for some carbohydrates. The light bulb suddenly started to come on. Slowly at first, but soon I was Googling and researching and reading articles as I suddenly began to understand. Over the last 2 to 3 weeks, I have bombarded my body with wheat in my attempts to perfect my bread-making skills. Toast every morning, a couple slices of fresh bread with butter and honey for a snack, discard pancakes and rolls and crackers and biscuits. Before, when I bought sourdough bread, I ate only a piece or two, maybe every 3 or 4 days, sometimes even going a week or 2 without any. But now I was having wheat 3 or 4 times every single day. What I discovered in my research stunned me. I know that I have wheat sensitivities and gluten intolerances. It's not an all-out allergy where I go into anaphylactic shock. It's not anything that shows up on tests, but I do have a wheat sensitivity and have had it my whole life. I knew that. So, as a typical human, if it doesn't radically and immediately affect me, I just tend to ignore it. Especially when it comes to delicious food like breads and baked goods and pasta. I still eat it, even though I know it's not something I should be eating or eating a lot of. I've had periods in my life where I've sworn off wheat and grains, but it had been a decade since I'd last done that. And over the last 10 years, I just honestly forgot about it. I'd never been a big bread eater, but now and then I'd indulge in some toast or pasta or a sandwich here and there whenever I felt like it. But over the last 3 weeks, I absolutely bombarded my poor body with a crap ton of wheat. There are so many articles out there and videos and websites and blogs that showcase how one of the biggest, most profound effects of eating wheat and gluten when you have intolerances is depression and anxiety. Other symptoms are aches and pains and stiffness and swollen joints and heartburn, indigestion, difficulty relaxing, restlessness, headaches, lethargy, and blood sugar spikes and crashes. So, a decade ago, when I'd sworn off all grains, I had read the book Wheat Belly by Dr. William Davis, but that had been 10 years ago. I'd kind of forgotten all about the detrimental effects of wheat and gluten on my body. I lay my head back on the pillow, totally stunned. I'd had a really crappy weekend. I was mentally not in a great place, with no explanation for all of my anxiety and my sudden bout of depression. I had raging heartburn, eczema flare-ups, and an achy back and a stiff ankle, and my knee joints were kind of swollen. And I even woke up a few times with a really stiff, sore shoulder, thinking it was some kind of arthritis. It all had to be the wheat. Unbelievable. I mean, it just goes to show you all. I wonder how many other people suffer from stuff like this, but don't make the connection. It's not just wheat either, but it's dairy, sugar, food coloring, or flavor enhancers, especially ingredients like MSG. All of those chemicals that they put into food. And here I was working so hard on my spiritual well-being, even quitting smoking in an effort to work on my physical health. And yet, I was essentially poisoning myself. Modern wheat and flour doesn't at all resemble what wheat used to be back in the times of Christ. Now, it's all GMO and hybrid varieties designed for maximum growth and profit. There are so many chemicals put into foods and so many nutrients that are stripped out of foods that it doesn't even resemble real food. That's why you'll often see the phrase artificial flavors or artificial coloring or enriched white flour or enriched bread. They have to put into the food what they originally took out. Even with pricey organic non-GMO flour, it's still modern-day varieties of wheat that have been created by laboratories and big grain producers. The understanding of what had happened to me just really ticked me off. And I mean ticked me off. And I love being ticked off about things like this because it puts me into action. No more. Forget the stupid sourdough fad. I don't need it. I couldn't believe that I thought everything I was feeling was a result of somebody praying over me wrong or some kind of spiritual attack. In all reality, it was just food. But I guess if you look at it, it actually is a form of spiritual attack. Because how many people out there eat crap food and feel anxious and depressed and have no idea that they're poisoning their bodies too? So, as of writing this, I am embarking on a brand new journey, my friends. If I'm going to go through all the torment of quitting smoking for my health, I am going to do it right. If I'm turning 50 this year and I'm working on my physical well-being, then I am going to go all in. So, as of tomorrow, I'm going straight paleo. Essentially, what that means is that I'm not going to do any grains or wheat or bread or packaged or processed foods. If my great-grandparents wouldn't recognize it as food, then I'm not eating it. Paleo, for those of you who don't know, is just a kind of diet that encompasses real, whole foods. It's not going to be an easy thing to do on a limited budget where packaged and processed foods are cheaper, but soon I'll have my garden in the ground, and until then, I'm just going to buy produce and meats at the grocery store. I'm going to donate as much as I can out of my pantry and clean up my diet. I've got a few books in my audiobook library about the paleo diet that I've listened to before, which is how I ate 10 years ago, the year I turned 40 and got into running and refrained from eating grains. I'd completely forgotten how good I felt eating that way and how full of energy I was and how positive my mindset was and how successful I was at nearly everything I did. It's time to come full circle, my friends. For the last 2 years, I have put my body through hell, literally, and now it's time to nurture it. More on that in a second, though, because I've got other things to share with you. So let's switch gears to imbalances. It took longer than I anticipated with a few rabbit trail episodes and, of course, getting sick back in December. But if you didn't notice, last week's episode about the imbalance of wanting bigger barns was the 10th imbalance topic that I've discussed so far. I'm wondering, how many of you paid close attention to the topic organization of each of them? Just for poops and giggles, let's go through them all in order. The first I called the imbalance of priorities. The second one was imbalance of self-worth, value, and influence. The third was the imbalance of self-importance. The fourth was the imbalance of busyness. The fifth was the imbalance of relationships. The sixth was the imbalance of negative thoughts. The seventh was the imbalance of sex, trust, and intimacy. The eighth was the imbalance of character and integrity. The ninth was the imbalance of a demonic tongue. And the 10th was the imbalance of bigger barns. Within that whole little mini-series I did there was a big old fat Easter egg. For those of you not familiar with the term, an Easter egg is a hidden message or a cryptic puzzle that isn't obvious, but some people who pay attention or who have a mind for detail will see it. Have you figured it out yet? If not, let me show you. For each of those big imbalances that humans struggle with the most, I gave them my own episode titles. I spent an entire episode on each one of those, and the reason for that is because when we don't get each of those imbalances right, it can have serious consequences on our lives. Oftentimes, God will correct us and recalibrate us so that we're living in alignment with each one of those topics, not out of balance. Sometimes that correction and recalibration can come in the form of spiritual attack, like addiction. I had several seriously out of whack imbalances in my life before I fell into gambling addiction. Yet, as I hashed out each one of those with you, God worked in me to fix them. Not totally, completely fixed, but they're a lot better. Yet the idea for those topics didn't come from my own mind. The whole thing actually came from God. He had the original titles for those list of imbalances. Do you want to hear what his titles were? Number 1, you shall have no other gods before me. Number 2, you shall not make idols. Number 3, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Number 4, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Number 5, honor your father and your mother. Number 6, you shall not murder. Number 7, you shall not commit adultery. Number 8, you shall not steal. Number 9, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. Or, in modern language, you shall not lie. And number 10, you shall not covet. For real, the 10 commandments. Every single imbalance that I discussed in those 10 episodes is actually one of the 10 commandments, in order. Now, if you are new to Christianity or you aren't at all familiar with the 10 commandments, there are 12 big main laws that God commands humans to live by. 10 of them are those commandments divinely given to Moses on Mount Sinai and written down in tablets. They are known as the 10 Commandments. The other 2, the biggest laws above the others, come from the mouth of Jesus, as was told to us in the Gospels, namely Matthew 22 and Mark 12. Allow me to read from Mark 12, verses 28 through 31. One of the teachers of religious law was standing there listening to the debate. He realized that Jesus had answered well, and so he asked, "Of all the commandments, which is the most important?" Jesus replied, "The most important commandment is this. Listen, O Israel, the Lord our God is the one and only Lord, and you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength. The second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. No other commandment is greater than these." When Jesus is saying, "O Israel," he is also referring to the Gentiles, meaning us who were not born Jews. I talked before about how we were grafted into God's holy tree and are now members of his family, as if we were legally adopted. God gives us these 12 laws to live by. It's not hard to see that it's kind of tough to live by those laws completely. If you listen to each imbalance episode, you probably recognize ways in which you struggled with them in your life. That, dear peeps, is the reason why we need Jesus. As flawed humans, we don't keep those commandments. Even if we try really, really hard, we slip up sometimes. There isn't a single person on this earth who hasn't broken one of those commandments. Breaking those commandments and not living by God's law is what's known as sin. That's the very definition of sin. And in order for us to have eternal life in God's perfect kingdom, we cannot have any sin in us. Our faith and our belief in Jesus Christ removes the sin of breaking those commandments so that we can have eternal life in God's holy kingdom of heaven, which I described in detail in other podcast episodes. So I want you all to understand something here. There is a lot of controversy and dissension toward Christian believers, especially today. Christians are often seen as rigid, racist, bigoted, subservient, ignorant, intolerant. And those who vehemently oppose Christianity view Christians as a demographic who make the world worse. I can tell you with all truthfulness that those people I've met who are true believers in Christ are honestly the most loving, selfless, non-judgmental, generous people that I've ever met. And why is that? Because Jesus told us the 2 greatest commandments involve love. Love your God first and love your neighbor second. Now, I'm not saying there aren't Christians with ugly hearts who've done or said awful things, but Jesus told us to watch out for wolves in sheep's clothing. Notice he didn't say wolves in shepherd's clothing. Those dark wolves that are fed by the devil and his demons love to slip in among us, trying to rattle us and divide us and distract us and trip us up. They dress like sheep, like us, and they act like sheep, like us, and they hang out with other sheep. But all the while, they are wolves who have intentions to devour us. Satan wants nothing more than for humanity to break those 12 commandments as much as possible and not to believe in Christ. Remember, his main goal is to stop as many people as he can from getting that inheritance that he isn't going to get. My job, my purpose in life, the reason God had me go through the trauma of gambling addiction was so that I could help all of you rise up in victory against the enemy, so that you could all claim your inheritance in Christ. You know, next week will be 1 full year since my podcast first launched. In that entire year, I have grown so much. You've all witnessed it in real time. I started off completely broken, shattered, anxiety-ridden, confused, hating myself, overflowing with guilt and fear, believing God had abandoned me. Nothing at all has changed in my personal and financial situation since then. I have no more money than I did a year ago. Actually, a year ago, I still had a job, so at least I had money coming in. I still live in the same house, married to the same man, doing the same daily routines. But 1 year later, I am so full of hope. I overflow with joy. I have no fear whatsoever and no anxiety. Well, no natural anxiety, that is. Anxiety that comes from eating crap modern food? Yeah, well, that's a different story. But I'm going to be working on that one. God graciously continues to work in me and through me, continuing to burn off anything that poisons my mind, my body, and my spirit. I have no idea how we're going to continue paying our bills next month and the month afterward and the month after that, but I'm not worried about it. God takes care of us. He provides. I spend my days loving Him above everything, and He continues to refine me, to mold me, to shape me, and to correct me. It's like a form of boot camp. I've gone through a seriously tough boot camp, and now I'm strong and conditioned, a warrior, unwavering, and filled with purpose and skills and a mission. I thank God 1,000,000 times over for my gambling addiction because it completely changed me. For the better. And yeah, that's a big ol' pun. But here's the thing, friends. I'm kind of over the whole gambling thing. I mean, first of all, I only gambled for 6 months out of my life. It was a stepping stone, the catalyst for this boot camp refinement process that God's been doing with me. I've talked for a year now, nearly every week, about gambling. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see that my podcast episodes have become more and more faith-based to the point where I barely even discuss gambling addiction anymore. Friends, I have changed so much over these last 12 months, and it's just honestly time for me to move on. It's a lot like quitting smoking. Right now, I'm still chewing nicotine gum or popping the occasional nicotine mint. But at some point, I'm going to wean off of that stuff and let that go as well. If I don't, then I'm still hanging on to the nicotine addiction. It goes in stages, but the goal is to be completely free from it. If I try to hang on to just a little bit of it, then I'm not going to be free of my addiction. It's the same with gambling. I mean, I have said all there is to say from my point of view on the topic. There are some terrific podcasters out there like Brian Hatch of the All In Addicted Gamblers podcast or Christina from the Broke Girl Society podcast that discuss many, many aspects of gambling, and they interview gambling addicts from all walks of life. I have recommendations for other podcasts as well on my website, thefeelingbetter.com, but I truly just don't want to stay in that lane anymore. I don't want to be in the realm of gambling addiction podcasting forever. And God has spent the last year preparing me for something bigger. And now He's sending me out into the world to be a warrior on a much larger mission. I had originally intended to have next Sunday be the final episode of the Feeling Better podcast. But as I said earlier, I actually changed my mind. I'm going to make this my final episode. And I'm going to give myself next weekend as a bit of a rest. Going forward, after today, there will be no more Feeling Better podcast episodes. The ones I've published will remain available to the public for new people to find, or for folks to go back and listen to if they need. My website will also remain up. But on Sunday, March 3rd, my brand new podcast will go live. That podcast is called Wandering in the Wilderness, subtitled Biblical Breadcrumbs for the Lost. I'm hoping you'll all follow me over there as well and continue to listen every Sunday. I'm going to put links to both my new website and my new podcast feed site in the show notes of this episode. I want you also to know how excited I am for this new podcast. It will give me the opportunity to expand my horizons and reach a much larger audience. As I stated on my new website, which is wanderinginthewilderness.com, again, link is in the show notes, In this new Christ-centered podcast, I'm expanding my format to discuss various topics of life that people might struggle with, like depression, anxiety, loss, work, relationships, spiritual warfare, social challenges, religious conflicts, and more. If you've ever felt alone or confused or frustrated or are simply searching for deeper meaning and purpose in your life, then that podcast is going to be for you. I'll be diving into every topic imaginable that we modern-day humans struggle with, and I'll also be doing various Bible studies that are meaningful and relevant to the challenge of living in these crazy times. And there's a form on that website, wanderinginthewilderness.com, where you can anonymously submit a question or a topic that you might want me to talk about. And again, I am not limiting anything to addiction. It encompasses everything that a person might struggle with in life, regardless of what that topic is. But it's all going to be addressed from a biblical perspective. You might remember when I started my imbalances segment that I was going to talk about 10 major imbalances, which were in fact the 10 commandments, but I also said I was going to talk about 10 minor ones. I'm actually just going to incorporate that second list of imbalances into the topic outline and blend it into the schedule for my new podcast. I'm still probably going to make the occasional reference to gambling over there, since that was part of this whole growth process for me and my first real experience with spiritual warfare. To be truthful, those episodes are probably not going to sound a whole lot different than the ones I've been doing here. But I won't feel so obligated to keep trying to tie in gambling addiction, if that makes sense. I won't feel guilty or misleading if I don't bring up gambling for a while. You know what I'm saying? In this podcast, I kept feeling like I had to keep tying that in order to make it relevant. It's just now time for me to move on. I'm no longer a problem gambler, and I no longer want to be a problem gambler podcaster. I just don't want to continue on that thread of gambling addiction when I'm over it. I'm sure a lot of you can understand that. It's sort of like the story of Lot's wife, right? The scriptures tell us that once God pulled her out of the fire, that she wasn't allowed to look back. But when she did, she turned into a pillar of salt. I do not want to turn into a pillar of salt. What this experience has shown me, though, is that God gave me this trial in preparation for something big. I thought it was my Feeling Better podcast to help people with gambling addiction. And again, although that was super important and relevant and helped a lot of people, it was just part of the preparation and boot camp. Now I'm leveling up. I've graduated, so to speak, and am being given my certificate of completion. I'm not saying I'm perfect. Far from it, or that all the work in me will ever be done. But I am prepared and equipped for a bigger mission that God has for me. And that's to use my spiritual gifts to cast a wide net to all those people around the world who need some love and some understanding and a whole lot of Jesus. There are so many lost sheep out there crying out in the wilderness just like I was a year ago. Some might know they're lost and desperately searching for their father, but others might not even realize they're wandering around in dangerous territory, unaware of the enemy that wants to devour them. Think of it kind of like this. There are pastors and preachers and heads of families and communities and biblical teachers that God appointed as shepherds under Jesus to tend to a flock. Some flocks are big and some flocks are small. Some flocks are safe and secure and content, but others are rowdy and agitated and always getting out of hand. My friend Nick, what up, Nick, said in an email to me that I should get into some kind of pastoring at a large church. I took that as a compliment and appreciate the kind words, and that meant a lot. But I live out in the country, and there are enough shepherds watching over the flocks and managing the pens here in my neck of the woods. I've always been an outdoor gal who loves adventure, who never does things the conventional way. The scriptures tell us that God knew us and had a plan for us before we were even born. Jeremiah was an Old Testament prophet known as the Weeping Prophet, and God sent him to the southern kingdom of Judah, right before Judah fell to Babylon and the people were led away into captivity. God sent Jeremiah to a crumbling, decaying nation to warn them of their impending demise, a warning that they ignored. There's a verse in Jeremiah that is one of the most quoted verses in the Bible, from Jeremiah 29:11, and it is the word of God speaking to Jeremiah, saying, "For I know the plans that I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." It's a fantastic verse, and there's more to it that I'll get into in my new podcast, but for now, I just want to share the very beginning of the book of Jeremiah, where God appoints him to do a special kind of work, a special mission. This is what God says to Jeremiah in chapter 1, verses 5 through 10. "The word of the Lord came to me, saying, Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as prophet to the nations. Alas, sovereign Lord, I said, I do not know how to speak. I am too young. But the Lord said to me, Do not say I am too young. You must go to everyone I send you to and say whatever I command you. Do not be afraid of them, for I am with you and will rescue you, declares the Lord. Then the Lord reached out his hand and touched my mouth and said to me, I have put words in your mouth. See, today I appoint you over nations and kingdoms to uproot and to tear down, to destroy and overthrow, to build and to plant. Now, I'm not saying I'm on the level of Jeremiah, but in the same way, God knew me before he formed me in my mother's womb. Before I was even born, he set me apart, knowing I would succumb to gambling addiction and would go on to launch a podcast. I wasn't aware that I had the words or the capability. I'd never launched or hosted a podcast in my entire life and knew nothing about it. But God reached out his hand and touched my mouth and said to me, I have put words in your mouth. Today I appoint you to go out and find my lost sheep. Help me to rescue them and bring them into the sheep pen. I had no idea that was his ultimate plan for me until just a couple of weeks ago, when he gave me the idea for this new podcast. You guys all know that I had originally put the idea out there to do a Bible study podcast. Some of you even joined me in the reading of Genesis in preparation for that. But I threw it out there to all of you before really spending deep time in prayer with my Father, asking him, is this really what you want me to do next? There are a lot of Bible studies and videos and podcasts and great preaching pastors out there who have taken folks through every book of the Bible. Dr. Bill Creasy is a great one. So is Dr. John Barnett. Pastor Skip Heitzig has taken many books of the Bible and gone through them individually verse by verse. Pastor Paul Wingfield from White Flag Church just did an amazing deep dive into the Gospel of Mark. Nope. After I said all of that to you and started putting the podcast name and artwork and material together, I really felt like that wasn't right. So I nixed my idea and said, okay, Lord, what is your idea? Which is what I should have done in the first place. And the good Father made it clear to me. Do what I'm doing now, only bigger, broader. Instead of speaking to gambling addicts, speak to addicts of all kinds. Speak to people dying of cancer or who just found out about their diagnosis. Speak to those who are burned out single moms. Speak to the guy who can't get out of the rat race in life or who's up to his ears in bills, or to the woman who just had a miscarriage, or to the Muslim gal in Dubai who doesn't feel much hope or joy in her current Islamic religion, or to the Gen Xer like me who's turning 50 and who's wondering how to find fulfillment with the remainder of their years. To anyone suffering hardship, who feels alone, who doesn't know where to turn, who's given up hope or who feels stuck, who needs purpose or encouragement, or who's feeling things that they just can't describe, or going through things that they just can't understand, or who's being held down or held back, or held hostage by something in their life, whatever it is, and they just can't figure it out or break free of it. All of them. Well, maybe not all of them, because some folks out there are content, or maybe blind is a better word, to their lostness. But there are a lot of folks stuck out there in the middle of the wilderness, feeling all alone, searching for someone or something. They're wandering around, trying to find the right path, maybe calling out subconsciously in their spirit. Those people, those ones, those sheep, Jesus is sending me out on a mission to go find them and bring them back home. And I want all of you, my awesome listeners who've stuck with me all this time, to join me. Because it's not just about saving the lost, but also about helping all of God's precious sheep stay close to Him during these tumultuous times. It's a crazy world out there. The buzzer is close to going off, and Satan's going to start ramping up his attacks in an effort to throw out a couple of Hail Marys to the world, to try to knock as many Christ believers off balance as possible. Once I get up running and I'm live, I'm going to need your help. I need as many soldiers with me to help kick Satan in the cojones, to share my podcast around to anyone or everyone that you think could benefit from it. I'm going to put a QR code on my podcast website with some kind of secret message. Maybe something like, "Do you feel lost? Here's a map to show you the way." Or something cheesy like that. Maybe I'll even make a few different ones. Perhaps another one that's more Indiana Jones-like, saying something along the lines of, "You've been chosen to receive the key of life." But whatever I choose, I need you guys to help me out. If you guys are going to, say, on a trip somewhere, or are hanging out in a big city, or doing some kind of volunteer work, or you're on a church mission, just print them out and cut them up and leave them in different places or hand them out to people. I used to do that years ago. I'd buy CDs, back when CDs were a thing, or DVDs or Bibles or gospel tracts or whatever, and just hand them out to people. I used to travel a lot for work, so I'd take them with me on my carry-on and give them out at the airport. Anyway, it's going to take a village. We're like biblical bounty hunters. We can't just go out there and start aggressively snatching people up. We've got to leave breadcrumb trails for them to follow. That's just how it works. Although, these are going to be hypothetical breadcrumbs because I'm swearing off bread, remember? I'm also going to use that platform to help people be the best they can be in all areas of life. That's going to include some of my discussion to venture away from grains and wheat into a more wholesome paleo diet, documenting in real time what that's going to do for my overall well-being. And I'm also going to be discussing financial stuff as I continue to navigate the waters of debt and joblessness and interviewing and rebuilding our financial lives. Plus, love and relationships and friendships and church and everything, all of it, with a faith-based biblical lens. I have done a tremendous amount of growing this year, and I thank each and every one of you for coming along with me on this journey. Thank you for your emails. Thank you for your love, for your support and your prayers. Next weekend, I'm taking a break to prepare for the launch of this new podcast. But on Sunday, March 3rd, I will be going live with my very first episode of Wandering in the Wilderness, Biblical Breadcrumbs for the Lost. All of the links to find me will be in the show notes of this episode. And if you can find the show notes, I'll have information for the new podcast on both websites, the feelingbetter.com website and my new website, wanderinginthe.wilderness.com. You can listen to it on all the major podcast platforms, just like with this podcast. I love you all. God bless, stay safe, and I'll see you again on March 3rd.
Like holy